cane, and even stopping to light his pipe in front of the small apartment where cowered our good landlady with her eternal basket of mending in her lap. At length all was quiet, and throwing open my door I withdrew into a small closet connected with my room, to wait with indescribable impatience the appearance of Mrs. Blake. She came in a very few minutes, remained for an instant, and departed, leaving behind her, as I had requested, the skirt and shawl in which she had left her father's presence. I at once endued myself in these articles of apparel, taking care to draw the shawl well over my head, and with a pocket-handkerchief to my face, a proceeding made natural enough by the sneeze which at that very moment I took care should assail me, walked boldly back to the room from which she had just come. The door was of course ajar, and as I swung it open with as near a simulation of her manner as possible, the vision of her powerful father lolling on a bench directly before me offered anything but an encouraging spectacle to my eyes. But doubling myself almost together, with as ladylike an "Achoo!" as my masculine nostrils would allow, I succeeded in closing the door and reaching a low stool by the window without calling from him anything worse than a fretful "I hope you are not going to bark too." I did not reply to this, of course, but sat with my face turned towards the street, in an attitude which I hoped would awaken his attention sufficiently to cause him to get up and come over to my side, for as he sat face to the door it would be impossible to take him by surprise, and that, now that I saw what a huge and muscular creature he was, seemed to me to be the only safe method before us. But whether from the sullenness of his disposition or the very evident laziness of the moment, he manifested no disposition to move, and hearing, or thinking I did, the stealthy advance of Mr. Gryce and his companions down the hall, I allowed myself to give way to a suppressed exclamation, and leaning forward, pressed my forehead against the pane of glass before me, as if something of absorbing interest had just taken place in the street beneath. His fears at once took alarm. Bounding up with a curse, he strode towards me, muttering, "What's up now? What's that you are looking at?" Reaching my side just as Mr. Gryce and his two men softly opened the door, and with a quick leap threw their arms about him, closing upon him with a force he could not resist, desperate as he was, and mighty in the huge strength of an unusually developed muscular organization. You girl there, are to blame for this," came mingled with curses from his lips, as with one huge pant he submitted to his captors. "Only let me get my hands well upon you once, damn it!" he suddenly exclaimed, dragging the whole three men forward in his effort to get his mouth down to my ear. "Go and rub that sign out on the door, or you know what I'll do well enough. Do you hear?" Rising, still with face averted, I proceeded to do what he asked, but in another moment, seeing that he had been effectually bound and gagged, I took out the piece of red chalk I had kept in my pocket, and deliberately chalked it on again, after which operation I came back and took my seat as before on the low stool by the window. The object now was to secure the second rascal in the same way we had the first, and for this purpose Mr. Gryce ordered the now helpless giant to be dragged into the adjoining small room formerly occupied by Mrs. Blake, where he and his men likewise took up their station, leaving me to confront as best I might the surprise and consternation of the one whose return we now awaited. I did not shrink. With that brave woman's garments drawn about me, something of her dauntless spirit seemed to invade my soul, and though I expected—but let that come in its place. I am not here to interest you in myself or my selfish thoughts. A half hour passed. He had never lingered away so long before, or so it seemed, and I was beginning to wonder if we should have to keep up this strain of nerve for hours, when the heavy tread was again heard in the hall, and with a blow of the fist that argued anger or a brutal impatience, he flung open the door and came in. I did not turn my head. "Where's father?" he growled, stopping where he was a foot or so from the door. I shook my head with a slight gesture and remained looking out. He brought his cane down on the floor with a thump. "What do you mean by sitting there staring out of the window like mad, and not answering when I ask you a decent question?" Still I made no reply. Provoked beyond endurance, yet held in check by that vague sense of danger in the air, which, while not amounting to apprehension, is often sufficient to hold back from advance the most daring foot, he stood glaring at me in what I felt to be a very ferocious attitude, but made no offer to move. Instantly I rose, and, still looking out of the window, made with my hand what appeared to be a signal to some one on the opposite side of the way. The ruse was effective. With an oath that rings in my ears yet, he lifted his heavy cane and advanced upon me with a bound, only to meet the same fate as his father at the hands of the watchful detectives. Not, however, before that heavy cane came down upon my head in a way to lay me in a heap at his feet, and to sow the seeds of that blinding headache, which has afflicted me by spells ever since. But this termination of the affair was no more than I had feared from the beginning, and indeed it was as much to protect Mrs. Blake from the wrath of these men as from any requirements of the situation I had assumed the disguise I then wore. I therefore did not allow this mishap to greatly trouble me, unpleasant as it was at the time, but as soon as ever I could do so, rose from the floor, and throwing off my strange habiliments, proceeded to finish up to my satisfaction the work already so successfully begun. Chapter 17